What drives a woman to become America's most feared predator? From those who are murdered for money to others who are killed out of jealousy, revenge, or cold calculation, these are not the crimes you expect from a mother, a wife, a neighbor. In this video, we uncover the darkest and most chilling stories of female serial killers whose shocking acts landed them on death row. Tiffany Moss. In October 2013, Tiffany Moss and her husband Eamon Moss committed the unthinkable. They tortured and starved Tiffany's 10-year-old stepdaughter, Imani Moss, to death. The crime happened in their apartment in Lawrenceville, a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. For months, Imani was locked in her room and denied food. She was forced to subsist on peanut butter sandwiches, or nothing at all, while her stepmother and father ate normal meals in front of her. By the time she died, Imani weighed just 32 pounds, the size of a 4-year-old. When she finally passed away, Tiffany and Eamon tried to cover up what they'd done. They placed Imani's emaciated body in a trash can, poured gasoline over her, and attempted to burn the remains to hide the evidence. On November 2, 2013, Eamon Moss, racked with guilt and panic after the failed attempt to dispose of his daughter's body, called 911. He confessed to the police that there was a dead body in their apartment. When police arrived, they found Imani's remains in the trash can in the apartment's yard. The shocking discovery and Eamon's confession quickly led to both parents' arrest. Eamon Moss pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But Tiffany Moss went to trial in April 2019. In a move that surprised many, she chose to represent herself in court. Throughout the proceedings, she sat silent, offered no defense, and cross-examined no witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming: photographs, autopsy reports, and heartbreaking testimony from teachers and family. The jury took only hours to convict her. Tiffany Moss was sentenced to death on April 30, 2019. She became the only woman on Georgia's death row at that time. As of now, Tiffany Moss remains on death row. No execution date has been set. In Georgia, executions are rare, and it often takes decades for a sentence to be carried out. Appeals are automatic, and her case will be reviewed by higher courts, but given the brutality of her crime, it is unlikely that her sentence will be overturned. Heather Leavell Keaton. In 2010, Heather Leavell Keaton became one of Alabama's most reviled killers. She and her common-law husband, John DeBlaze, murdered his 2 children, 3-year-old Chase and 4-year-old Natalie DeBlaze, in a crime that unfolded over several months in Mobile County, Alabama. Prosecutors revealed that Heather poisoned the children by mixing antifreeze into their food and, when that wasn't enough, choked them to death. The children were subjected to systematic abuse and torture before being killed. After Natalie's remains were discovered in the woods in December 2010, police began an intensive investigation. John DeBlaze eventually confessed to the murders, implicating Heather as the mastermind. Investigators found evidence of the children's horrific treatment, and Heather was arrested shortly thereafter. During her trial, prosecutors argued that Heather was jealous and resentful of her husband's children, seeing them as obstacles. The court heard evidence of prolonged torture and neglect. Testimonies from John DeBlaze and other witnesses painted a picture of a woman who was cold and calculating. The jury heard how she poisoned, starved, and ultimately killed the children. Heather showed little emotion during proceedings. Heather Leavell Keaton was sentenced to death on April 11, 2015, becoming the first woman ever sent to death row in Mobile County, Alabama. As of now, Heather Leavell Keaton remains on death row in Alabama. No execution date has been set. Like most capital cases, her sentence is subject to lengthy appeals. Alabama executes a few women, and it may be many years before her sentence is carried out. Michelle Lynn Michaud. In December 1997, Michelle Lynn Michaud and her boyfriend, James DiVeggio, carried out one of the most gruesome crimes in California history. Together, they kidnapped 22-year-old Vanessa Sampson in Pleasanton, California. The couple lured Vanessa into their van, which was equipped for torture. Over the course of several hours, Michaud and DiVeggio sexually assaulted, tortured, and ultimately strangled their victim with a rope. The couple then dumped her body in a snowy embankment near Lake Tahoe. Investigators later learned that Michaud and DiVeggio had also abused and raped Michaud's own 13-year-old daughter and other girls before escalating to murder. The case broke when Michaud's daughter and other victims went to police, reporting the abuse. Investigators quickly connected the couple to Vanessa's disappearance and murder. The van, dubbed the Van of Horrors, was recovered with forensic evidence tying Michaud and DiVeggio to the crime. At trial, prosecutors laid out the horrifying details of the kidnapping, torture, and murder, presenting overwhelming physical and testimonial evidence. Michaud showed no remorse for her crimes. In 2002, she and DiVeggio were both convicted of capital murder. Michelle Lynn Michaud was sentenced to death in 2003 and remains one of the few women on California's death row for serial sexual homicide. As of now, Michaud remains on death row at the Central California Women's Facility. California has had a moratorium on executions since 2006, so unless this policy changes, her execution is unlikely to take place anytime soon. Janine Snyder. In 2001, Janine Snyder and her boyfriend, Michael Thornton, committed a series of brutal crimes in Southern California. Snyder lured 16-year-old Michelle Curran and other teenage girls to hotels with promises of friendship and fun. Once there, Snyder and Thornton would kidnap, torture, sexually abuse, and ultimately murder their victims. Curran was tortured and killed, and Snyder confessed to killing at least one other 14-year-old girl who had been missing for 5 years. The investigation began when 2 other teenage girls managed to escape and reported the crimes to the police. Their testimonies helped police zero in on Snyder and Thornton. Forensic evidence from hotel rooms and Snyder's own confessions sealed the case. During her trial, harrowing details emerged of the manipulation, torture, and abuse Snyder inflicted on her victims. Witnesses described her as both a willing participant and a driving force behind the crimes. The jury quickly found her guilty. Janine Snyder was sentenced to death in California in 2003 and remains on death row. Like other women on California's death row, Snyder is unlikely to face execution soon, due to the state's moratorium. She continues to appeal her conviction. Blanche Taylor Moore. Blanche Taylor Moore, a North Carolina woman, was convicted of poisoning her boyfriend, Raymond Reed, with arsenic in 1986. But her crimes didn't end there. Moore is suspected of killing at least 3 others, including her first husband and her lover's wife, and of nearly killing another, all through slow arsenic poisoning. Her victims suffered prolonged, painful deaths, often over the course of months. After Reed's death, toxicology tests revealed massive arsenic levels in his body. An investigation soon found a pattern of mysterious illnesses and deaths surrounding Moore, and her exhumed former husband's body tested positive for arsenic as well. Moore was arrested and charged in 1989. The trial revealed Moore's long pattern of manipulation, greed, and deadly jealousy. Prosecutors presented evidence linking her to a string of poisoning spanning decades. She was found guilty of first-degree murder in 1990. Blanche Taylor Moore was sentenced to death in 1990, and her story became the subject of true crime books and a TV movie. Blanche Taylor Moore remains on North Carolina's death row, but her age, now in her 80s, and health make it unlikely she will ever be executed. North Carolina has not executed a woman since 1984. Robin Lee Rowe. Robin Lee Rowe, a Boise, Idaho woman, murdered her husband and 2 children by setting fire to their home in 1992. Prosecutors argued that she killed her family in order to collect on life insurance policies, having already lost 2 other children under suspicious circumstances years before. Investigators discovered that Rowe had a pattern of insurance-related deaths in her family history. After the fire, investigators determined that it had been deliberately set with accelerants. They uncovered the life insurance policies and evidence that Rowe had purchased gasoline and was not at home at the time of the fire. Faced with mounting evidence and her own confession during sentencing, Rowe was arrested and charged with triple homicide. The trial painted Rowe as a cold and calculating killer motivated by greed. Evidence of her past suspicious deaths further cemented her guilt. She was convicted in 1993. Robin Lee Rowe was sentenced to death in December 1993, becoming the only woman on Idaho's death row. As of now, Rowe remains on death row. No execution date has been set, and appeals continue to delay her fate. Idaho rarely executes women, and her age and ongoing legal battles may prevent her sentence from ever being carried out. Patricia Blackman. In May 1999, Patricia Blackman was convicted in Alabama for the murder of her 2-year-old adopted daughter, Dominiqua Bryant. The crime occurred in Dothan, Alabama. Blackman brutally beat Dominiqua, inflicting a fractured skull, multiple broken bones, severe bruising, and leaving a shoe print on her chest. The abuse was not a one-time incident, but rather a sustained pattern, with the autopsy revealing both old and new injuries. Dominiqua died as a result of these horrifying beatings. After Dominiqua's death, hospital staff became suspicious due to the severity and multiplicity of her injuries. Blackman's explanations were inconsistent and did not match the medical evidence. Authorities launched an investigation, and forensic evidence pointed directly to Patricia Blackman as the perpetrator. She was arrested soon after. At trial, prosecutors painted Blackman as a cruel and violent woman who systematically abused her adopted daughter. Medical experts and child welfare professionals testified to the brutality of the injuries. Blackman's defense argued about the constitutionality of the death penalty for cases involving young children, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Patricia Blackman was sentenced to death on August 20, 1999. The age of the victim, under 14, made the case eligible for capital punishment in Alabama. As of now, Patricia Blackman remains on Alabama's death row. Her appeals have been denied, including a petition to the United States Supreme Court in 2009. Alabama rarely executes women, and lengthy appeals processes mean her sentence may not be carried out for years, if ever. Samantha Allen. On July 12, 2011, Samantha Allen, along with her husband John Allen, was responsible for the death of 10-year-old Amy Deal in Phoenix, Arizona. Amy was her cousin and also lived in the same household. Amy was routinely subjected to horrific abuse by family members, but on the night of her death, Samantha and John forced her to do strenuous exercises in the Arizona heat and then locked her inside a tiny footlocker as a punishment for taking a popsicle. Amy suffocated overnight in the box, which was only 3 feet by 1 foot 2 inches. Initially, the family tried to pass Amy's death off as an accident, claiming she had been playing hide-and-seek. However, police quickly grew suspicious due to the family's history of abuse and inconsistent statements. Interrogations led to confessions from Samantha and John, who admitted to locking Amy in the trunk. During her trial, harrowing details emerged of the years of abuse suffered by Amy at the hands of multiple family members. The jury saw evidence of physical torture and emotional cruelty. Samantha Allen was convicted of first-degree murder and child abuse. Samantha Allen was sentenced to death on August 7, 2017, becoming one of the very few women on Arizona's death row. Samantha Allen remains on death row in Arizona. Executions in the state are infrequent, especially for women, and her case will likely be subject to years of appeals. Cynthia Kaufman. In 1986, Cynthia Kaufman and her boyfriend James Marlowe went on a violent crime spree in California, kidnapping, robbing, and murdering 4 women: Sandra Neary, Pamela Simmons, Corinna Novus, and Lynell Murray. The murders occurred over the span of a month, and some of the victims were sexually assaulted by Marlowe before being killed. Kaufman's involvement included luring the women, participating in their abduction, and aiding in the murders. The killing spree ended when police, investigating the disappearance of the last victim, Lynell Murray, found physical evidence linking Kaufman and Marlowe to the crimes. The pair were arrested after being caught with items belonging to their victims. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of Kaufman's participation in the series of kidnappings and murders. Kaufman tried to argue that she was under Marlowe's control and acted out of fear, but the jury was not convinced, especially given the level of planning and cruelty involved. She was found guilty of multiple counts of first-degree murder. Cynthia Kaufman was sentenced to death in 1989, making her the first woman to receive a death sentence in California after the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1977. Kaufman remains on death row in California. With the state's moratorium on executions, it is unlikely she will be executed soon. Her appeals have been unsuccessful, but unless the moratorium is lifted, her sentence may never be carried out. Christy Michelle Scott. In August 2008, Christy Michelle Scott set fire to her home in Russellville, Alabama, resulting in the death of her 6-year-old son, Mason Scott. Investigators discovered that she had purchased a $100,000 life insurance policy on her son just hours before his death. Mason, who suffered from developmental and behavioral disorders, was found in his bed after the fire, which was determined to be arson. Fire investigators quickly found evidence of accelerants and suspicious patterns in the fire's origin. The newly purchased life insurance policy raised immediate red flags. Further investigation and forensic evidence confirmed that Scott had started the blaze intentionally. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence of premeditation, showing Scott's motive was financial gain. The jury was also told about Mason's vulnerable condition and the callousness of her actions. Scott denied setting the fire, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was found guilty of capital murder. Christy Michelle Scott was sentenced to death on April 22, 2009. Scott remains on death row in Alabama. The state seldom executes women, and her sentence may remain in legal limbo for years as appeals continue. Lisa Leanne Graham. On July 5, 2007, in Russell County, Alabama, Lisa Leanne Graham was convicted of orchestrating the murder of her own 20-year-old daughter, Stephanie Shea Graham. Lisa persuaded a family friend to shoot her daughter execution-style on a remote dirt road. Motives discussed in court included financial stress, personal conflict, and allegations of drug involvement. The crime came to light when the family friend, under pressure during police interrogation, confessed and implicated Lisa Graham as the mastermind behind the killing. Forensic evidence and communications between Graham and her accomplice supported the confession. At trial, prosecutors presented evidence of Graham's manipulative nature and willingness to sacrifice her own child. Her defense team argued mental health issues, including borderline intellectual functioning, but the jury was not convinced. She was found guilty of capital murder. Lisa Leanne Graham was sentenced to death in 2015. Lisa Graham remains on Alabama's death row. With appeals underway and the rarity of female executions in the state, her sentence may not be carried out for many years, if ever. Tierra Capri Gobble. Tierra Capri Gobble was convicted in Alabama for the death of her 4-month-old son, Phoenix Cody Parrish, in December 2004. According to the coroner's report, Phoenix suffered extensive bruising, fractures of the skull, ribs, and wrists, and died of head trauma consistent with severe child abuse. The abuse was ongoing. His injuries reflected repeated violence, not a single incident. Gobble brought her unresponsive infant to the hospital, where staff immediately suspected abuse due to the nature and extent of Phoenix's injuries. Authorities investigated, and medical evidence ruled out accidental injury. Under questioning, Gobble's explanations were inconsistent, and the pattern of abuse became clear. She was arrested shortly after her son's death. During the trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming forensic evidence of prolonged, repeated abuse. Testimony from medical experts detailed the timeline and severity of the baby's injuries. Gobble maintained her innocence, but the jury found her guilty of capital murder. Tierra Capri Gobble was sentenced to death in 2005, becoming one of the youngest women ever sent to Alabama's death row. As of now, Gobble remains on death row. Her appeals have been denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. Like most women in Alabama sentenced to death, execution may not happen for years, if ever, given the slow pace of appeals and the rarity of female executions. Wendy Andriano. Wendy Andriano was convicted in Arizona for the brutal 2000 murder of her terminally ill husband, Joe Andriano. Wendy attempted to poison Joe with sodium azide, a deadly chemical, but when he did not die quickly enough, she bludgeoned him with a bar stool and stabbed him multiple times in their Phoenix apartment. The autopsy showed 23 skull blows and traces of poison in his system. After the attack, Wendy called 911, claiming her husband had fallen and she found him dead. However, police and paramedics found inconsistencies in her story, and forensic evidence contradicted her account. Detectives also uncovered evidence of a new romantic relationship and a life insurance policy, suggesting motive. She was arrested after a thorough investigation. Prosecutors argued Wendy wanted to rid herself of a sick husband to pursue a new life and collect insurance. The jury heard about the poisoning, the affair, and her suspicious actions before and after the murder. Wendy testified in her own defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. Wendy Andriano was sentenced to death in 2004 and remains one of the few women on Arizona's death row. She remains on death row at Perryville Prison. Arizona rarely executes women, and ongoing appeals mean her execution date is uncertain and likely years away. Celeste Carrington. Celeste Carrington was convicted in California for a string of violent crimes in early 1992. She fatally shot Victor Esperanza, a janitor, during a robbery at a shoe factory in San Carlos, and, just months later, shot and killed Caroline Gleason, a property manager in Palo Alto. Days after the second murder, Carrington also shot and wounded a pediatrician during another robbery. The crimes were calculated, and her willingness to kill during robberies earned her the label of a serial killer. Carrington was identified through ballistic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and surveillance footage from the crime scenes. After the attempted murder of the pediatrician, police were able to track her down and make an arrest. At trial, prosecutors described Carrington's troubled upbringing and history of abuse, but emphasized her violent spree and the calculated nature of her crimes. Victim impact statements underscored the devastation she caused. Carrington was found guilty on all counts. Celeste Carrington was sentenced to death in 1995. She remains on California's death row, where executions have been halted by a statewide moratorium. Despite numerous appeals, she is unlikely to face execution anytime soon. Tanya Nelson. In April 2005, Tanya Nelson orchestrated the murder of fortune teller Ha Jade Smith and Smith's daughter, Anita Vo, in Garden Grove, California. Nelson was angry over a failed business prophecy and sought revenge. With an accomplice, she traveled from North Carolina to California, where she and her partner brutally stabbed both women to death and ransacked their home for valuables. The crime was discovered after Smith and Vo failed to show up for scheduled appointments, and their bodies were found during a welfare check. Evidence at the scene and credit card records pointed to Nelson and her accomplice, who were arrested upon returning to North Carolina. The accomplice later testified against Nelson. The prosecution detailed the calculated nature of the double murder, Nelson's anger and greed, and her failed belief in Smith's fortune-telling. The jury saw photographic and physical evidence and heard testimony from the accomplice. Nelson was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Tanya Nelson was sentenced to death in 2006. Nelson remains on California's death row. Ongoing moratoriums and lengthy appeals make her execution unlikely for the foreseeable future. Donna Roberts. Donna Roberts was convicted in Ohio for planning and facilitating the murder of her ex-husband, Robert Fingerhut, in December 2001. She conspired with her lover, Nathaniel Jackson, to kill Fingerhut for financial gain. Roberts provided Jackson with access to her home, helped plan the murder, and took steps to cover up her involvement. The investigation revealed Roberts' relationship with Jackson, who was already on parole. Forensic evidence at the scene, including DNA and surveillance footage, tied both Jackson and Roberts to the crime. Phone records and letters detailed the conspiracy, and Jackson's confession confirmed Roberts' role. At trial, prosecutors presented the conspiracy in detail, using Roberts' own words and actions to show her culpability. The defense argued she was manipulated, but the jury disagreed. Roberts was found guilty of aggravated murder and conspiracy. Donna Roberts was sentenced to death in 2003. She has been resentenced multiple times due to procedural errors, but her sentence has always been reinstated. Roberts remains on death row in Ohio. The state has executed very few women, and lengthy appeals continue to delay her fate. Thank you for watching. This video was created purely for educational purposes, to provide a clear understanding of these criminal cases and how the justice system processes severe offenses. If you find this information valuable, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on more true crime content. Stay safe and informed.